The Bank of Canada just dropped a bombshell that has real estate experts scrambling. With over 60% of mortgages set to renew in the next 2 years and prices already declining across major Ontario markets, we're staring at what could be the most dramatic housing correction this province has ever seen. While politicians promise soft landings, the numbers tell a very different story. Are you ready to discover which Ontario cities are about to witness devastating price crashes that could wipe out years of equity overnight? Ontario's housing market is teetering on the edge of collapse. Number 10. Thunder Bay. The mining city that time forgot is about to learn a harsh lesson about artificial price inflation. Thunder Bay's housing market has been living in a fantasy world, with average prices skyrocketing by 10% year over year to $392,569 in 2025. But here's what the cheerful headlines won't tell you. This northern city is built on economic quicksand that's about to give way. Thunder Bay's entire economic foundation rests on resource extraction and government jobs, both sectors facing unprecedented pressure. The mining industry is consolidating, government budgets are tightening, and young professionals are fleeing south faster than you can say career opportunity. When your population is aging rapidly and your main industries are contracting, where exactly is the demand going to come from to sustain these inflated prices? The city's unemployment rate has been quietly climbing while construction continues at unsustainable levels. Real estate speculators poured money into Thunder Bay thinking they found the next hidden gem, but they're about to discover why properties were affordable in the first place. The harsh reality is that Thunder Bay's recent price surge represents pure speculation disconnected from economic fundamentals. When reality hits, and it's coming fast, those $400,000 properties could easily drop to $250,000 or less. The writing is already on the wall. Inventory is building up like a dam about to burst. But Thunder Bay's problems pale in comparison to what's brewing in our next city. Number 9. Sudbury. The nickel capital of the world is about to get a harsh reminder that commodity booms don't last forever. Sudbury's housing market, with average prices hovering around $506,435, is experiencing what economists call a resource curse correction. The city built its entire economic identity around mining, and now that foundation is cracking under the weight of global economic uncertainty. Here's the terrifying truth about Sudbury. The city's housing demand has been artificially propped up by a combination of mining speculation and government infrastructure spending that's rapidly coming to an end. Vail and Glencore, the mining giants that have kept this city alive, are scaling back operations and automating processes faster than the local economy can adapt. The ripple effect is already visible if you know where to look. Local businesses are reporting declining revenues, young families are relocating to southern Ontario, and new construction projects are being quietly cancelled. The municipal government is facing a budget crisis that they're desperately trying to hide from residents. When mining revenues drop and government funding dries up, Sudbury's housing market will face a double-barreled economic disaster. Property values that seemed reasonable at $500,000 will look absurdly overpriced when the average household income drops by 20%. The city's isolated location means there's no economic diversification safety net. When mining goes down, everything goes down with it. Experts are quietly predicting a 40% price correction once the reality of Sudbury's economic vulnerability becomes undeniable. The situation gets even more alarming when we examine our 8th city. Number 8. Peterborough. The university town that became a COVID casualty is about to face its reckoning. Peterborough's housing market got caught up in the pandemic exodus from Toronto, with prices inflating to levels that make absolutely no economic sense for a city with limited job opportunities and declining student enrollment. The temporary demand surge that drove prices up 35% in 2 years is evaporating faster than morning mist over the Otonabee River. Peterborough's economic reality is harsh and getting harsher by the month. Trent University, the city's economic anchor, is facing enrollment crisis and budget cuts that threaten hundreds of local jobs. The manufacturing sector that once provided middle-class employment has been gutted by automation and international competition. Meanwhile, remote work opportunities that temporarily made Peterborough attractive to Toronto refugees are disappearing as companies force employees back to offices. The city's average household income of $68,000 simply cannot support housing prices that reached Toronto suburb levels during the pandemic frenzy. Local residents are being priced out by speculative investors who bought properties thinking the remote work trend would continue indefinitely. Here's what's really terrifying. Peterborough's rental market is collapsing as Airbnb investors realize their properties can't sustain profitable occupancy rates. The city is facing a perfect storm of declining student population, limited job growth, and speculative investment unwinding all at once. When the correction hits, and Bank of Canada data suggests it's already beginning, properties that sold for $650,000 in 2024 could easily drop to $400,000 by 2026. The psychological impact of watching their largest investment lose 40% of its value will trigger panic selling that accelerates the downward spiral. But even Peterborough's problems seem manageable compared to what's happening in our seventh city. Number 7. Windsor. The automotive city that missed the electric vehicle revolution is about to pay the ultimate price. Windsor's housing market, already showing cracks with a 4.9% year-over-year decline, is positioned for catastrophic failure as the automotive industry undergoes its most dramatic transformation in a century. The city that built its entire identity around Detroit's automotive empire is discovering that location advantages can become crushing disadvantages overnight. Windsor's economic foundation is crumbling in real time, and most residents have no idea how bad things are about to get. The automotive sector that employs nearly 30% of the local workforce is automating and electrifying at a pace that will eliminate thousands of jobs within the next 3 years. Ford, Stellantis, and GM are quietly shifting production to facilities in Mexico and the southern United States, where labor costs are lower and government incentives are more attractive. The University of Windsor's automotive research programs are losing funding as manufacturers move their R&AMP operations closer to their new production centers. Cross-border commerce, which provided significant economic cushioning for decades, is declining as trade relations become increasingly complicated and automated systems reduce the need for human intermediaries. Here's the devastating reality. Windsor's average home price of $550,000 was sustainable when automotive workers earned $75,000 annually with overtime opportunities. As those jobs disappear and are replaced by service sector positions paying $35,000, the mathematical impossibility becomes obvious. The city's proximity to Detroit, once its greatest asset, is now a liability as economic decline spreads across the border. Real estate investors who thought they were buying into Canada's automotive heartland are about to discover they purchased properties in a Rust Belt city. The industrial decline we're seeing in Windsor is nothing compared to the tech bubble burst happening in our sixth city. Number 6. Barrie. The cottage country commuter town that became a pandemic real estate darling is facing the harsh reality of post-COVID economic rebalancing. Barrie's housing market, with median prices already dropping 4.8% year-over-year to $770,000, is experiencing the early stages of what could be the most dramatic price correction in Ontario outside the Greater Toronto Area. The city that benefited enormously from Toronto's housing overflow is about to learn that borrowed demand creates unstable markets. Barrie's fundamental problem is that its recent growth was built on unsustainable assumptions about remote work permanence and Toronto housing market dynamics. The city attracted thousands of Toronto refugees during the pandemic who were willing to commute 90 minutes each way for affordable housing and cottage country lifestyle. But as employers mandate return-to-office policies and gas prices remain elevated, that daily commute is becoming financially and psychologically unbearable. Local employment opportunities in Barrie simply cannot support the housing prices that Toronto refugees were willing to pay. The city's economy relies heavily on retail, hospitality, and service sectors that pay wages insufficient to qualify for $700,000 mortgages. Meanwhile, construction boomed to meet perceived demand, creating an oversupply situation that's becoming more apparent each month. Here's the cruel irony. Barrie's natural beauty and recreational opportunities, which drove its appeal, are being destroyed by rapid development and population growth. Traffic congestion on Highway 400 has reached Toronto levels. Local services are overwhelmed, and the small-town charm that attracted newcomers is disappearing under suburban sprawl. The city is caught in a vicious cycle where housing costs have priced out essential workers like teachers, nurses, and police officers, creating service delivery problems that make the community less attractive. As Toronto commuters realize the financial and lifestyle costs of their decisions, reverse migration is accelerating. Properties that seemed reasonably priced at $750,000 will look absurdly expensive when local economic reality reasserts itself and prices correct to levels sustainable on Barrie wages. The commuter city crisis extends beyond Barrie to our fifth city, where the situation is even more precarious. Number 5, Burlington. The suburban paradise that became a millionaire's ghetto is about to face a reckoning that will shock even seasoned real estate observers. Burlington's average home price of $1.2 million represents one of the most extreme examples of housing market disconnection from local economic reality in all of Ontario. This supposed family-friendly community has priced out the very families it claims to serve, creating an unsustainable bubble that's already showing signs of catastrophic deflation. Burlington's economic fundamentals simply cannot support million-dollar average housing prices, regardless of its proximity to Toronto and Hamilton. The city's employment base consists primarily of retail, professional services, and small manufacturing, sectors that provide solid middle-class incomes but nowhere near the $300,000 household income required to afford local housing prices. The psychological breaking point has already been reached, as evidenced by plummeting sales volumes and increasing days on market. Local residents are discovering that their community has become unlivable for anyone except speculators and wealthy retirees cashing out of Toronto real estate. The school system that once attracted families is losing enrollment as young families relocate to more affordable communities. But Burlington's suburban bubble is minor compared to the industrial collapse brewing in our fourth city. Number 4, Hamilton. The steel city that tried to reinvent itself as Toronto's hip younger sibling is about to discover that industrial decline and hipster gentrification don't mix well with economic reality. Hamilton's housing market, once considered Toronto's most affordable alternative, has inflated to levels that would be laughable if they weren't so economically destructive. Average prices approaching $900,000 in a city where the median household income barely reaches $70,000 represents mathematical impossibility masquerading as market dynamics. Hamilton's fundamental economic challenges are accelerating rather than improving, despite optimistic rhetoric from city officials and real estate boosters. Stelco's decline continues as global steel markets face overcapacity and environmental regulations tighten. The port operations that once provided thousands of stable jobs are increasingly automated, eliminating employment faster than the city can create alternatives. McMaster University, while prestigious, cannot single-handedly support a city of 500,000 people, especially as provincial funding cuts force program reductions and staff layoffs. The much-vaunted arts and culture renaissance in the downtown core employs hundreds of people in an economy that needs tens of thousands of good-paying jobs. Here's the brutal reality that Hamilton refuses to acknowledge. The city's industrial infrastructure is aging, environmentally problematic, and economically uncompetitive in the global marketplace. Air quality issues make the city less attractive to the knowledge workers it desperately needs to attract. The cost of living has increased faster than wages in every sector except real estate speculation. Young professionals who briefly considered Hamilton as a Toronto alternative are discovering that commuting costs, air quality, and limited cultural amenities make the savings illusory. The city's attempt to market itself as Toronto's Brooklyn backfired spectacularly as prices reached Brooklyn levels without Brooklyn's economic opportunities or cultural amenities. When Hamilton's housing correction accelerates, properties that peaked at $950,000 could easily drop to $550,000 as buyers realize they can get better value, cleaner air, and more opportunities elsewhere in Ontario. The industrial city problems we see in Hamilton are amplified in our third city, where the situation borders one economic catastrophe. Number 3, Kitchener-Waterloo. The Silicon Valley North that became Silicon Valley nonsense is facing the harsh reality that tech bubbles burst harder than housing bubbles. Kitchener-Waterloo's housing market, with average prices already declining 2.9% to $753,000, is experiencing the early stages of what could be Ontario's most spectacular tech-driven real estate collapse. The region that marketed itself as Canada's innovation capital is discovering that innovation doesn't automatically translate to sustainable economic growth or housing demand. The technology sector that drove Kitchener-Waterloo's housing boom is imploding faster than anyone predicted, taking the local real estate market down with it. BlackBerry's continued decline eliminated thousands of high-paying jobs that supported local housing demand. Google's Waterloo operations are scaling back as the company focuses resources on its California headquarters and international expansion. Numerous startups that generated media attention and speculative investment have quietly failed or relocated to more cost-effective markets. The University of Waterloo's cooperative education program, once a guaranteed pipeline of tech talent, is producing graduates who increasingly seek opportunities in Toronto, Vancouver, or the United States. Here's what makes Kitchener-Waterloo's situation particularly dangerous. The region's entire economic identity was built around attracting and retaining tech workers who commanded premium salaries. As those jobs disappear or relocate, the local economy lacks diversification to absorb displaced workers. Manufacturing jobs that once provided economic stability have been eliminated through automation and global competition. The service sector jobs that remain pay wages incompatible with housing prices that were justified by tech salaries. The region's cost of living increased dramatically during the tech boom but hasn't adjusted downward. A economic reality reasserts itself. Traffic congestion on Highway 401 makes commuting to Toronto increasingly unbearable for residents seeking employment alternatives. The psychological impact of watching the Silicon Valley North narrative collapse will accelerate panic selling, as residents realize their community's economic foundation was built on speculation rather than sustainable business fundamentals. Properties that reached $800,000 during the tech bubble could easily drop to $450,000 as the region's economic reality becomes undeniable. But even the tech collapse in Kitchener-Waterloo pales in comparison to the demographic and economic crisis unfolding in our second city. Number 2, London. The university town that became a medical industry mirage is about to experience one of Ontario's most devastating housing market corrections. London's average home prices, hovering around $650,000, represent a triumph of speculation over economic fundamentals that would be impressive if it weren't so economically destructive. The city that marketed itself as Ontario's medical and education hub is discovering that hospitals and universities alone cannot sustain a modern urban economy or justify inflated housing prices. London's economic foundation is far more fragile than civic boosters admit, and the cracks are widening into chasms that will swallow property values whole. Western University faces enrollment declines and provincial funding cuts that threaten thousands of jobs directly and indirectly related to the institution. The medical sector that supposedly drives local economic growth is increasingly consolidated, automated, and cost-conscious, eliminating middle management positions that supported housing demand. General Dynamics, once a major employer, continues downsizing operations as defense contracts shift to other jurisdictions. The financial services sector that provided white-collar employment is increasingly centralized in Toronto, leaving London with branch operations and call centers that pay wages incompatible with current housing prices. Here's what makes London's situation particularly tragic. The city has all the infrastructure and amenities of a major urban center, but lacks the economic diversity to support metropolitan housing prices. Local residents earning $55,000 annually are competing against Toronto refugees and speculators willing to pay Toronto-adjacent prices for London with branch operations and call centers that pay wages incompatible with current housing prices. Here's what makes London's situation particularly tragic. The city has all the infrastructure and amenities of a major urban center, but lacks the economic diversity to support metropolitan housing prices. Local residents earning $700,000 could easily drop to $350,000, as buyers realize they can get comparable amenities and better economic opportunities in communities that haven't inflated their housing markets beyond sustainable levels. But even London's multifaceted economic crisis seems manageable compared to the perfect storm brewing in our number one city. Number 1, Oshawa. The automotive city that missed every transition is facing complete economic and housing market collapse that will serve as a cautionary tale for generations. Oshawa's housing market, despite recent price declines, remains dangerously overvalued relative to the city's economic reality and long-term prospects. This former automotive powerhouse represents everything wrong with Ontario's industrial policy, and housing speculation rolled into one catastrophic package. Oshawa's economic foundation has been systematically destroyed over the past decade, and the housing market correction will be correspondingly severe. General Motors' Canadian headquarters closure eliminated thousands of direct jobs and tens of thousands of indirect employment opportunities throughout the regional economy. The automotive parts suppliers that once provided middle-class employment have relocated operations to Mexico and the southern United States, where labor costs are lower and government incentives more attractive. Durham College and UOIT provide some employment stability, but educational institutions cannot replace manufacturing as an economic driver for a city of 170,000 people. The promised transition to green technology and electric vehicle manufacturing has failed to materialize at the scale necessary to replace lost automotive employment. Here's the devastating reality that Oshawa refuses to acknowledge. The city's entire infrastructure, from housing patterns to commercial districts, was designed around automotive employment that no longer exists and will never return. Properties were priced based on automotive wages and job security that disappeared permanently when GM closed its operations. The commuter rail connection to Toronto provides some economic lifeline, but the cost and time commitment make it impractical for most employment situations. Local businesses that depended on automotive worker spending have closed or downsized, creating a retail apocalypse that makes the community less attractive and viable. The municipal government faces a fiscal crisis as the tax base shrinks and infrastructure maintenance costs remain fixed. Young families have been relocating to communities with better economic prospects, leaving behind an aging population that cannot sustain housing demand. The psychological impact of watching their community's primary identity and economic foundation disappear has created a depression that extends far beyond economic statistics. When Oshawa's housing correction reaches its inevitable conclusion, properties that still command $250,000 or less as buyers realize they're purchasing homes in a community with no economic future. The city that once symbolized Canadian automotive prosperity will become a symbol of what happens when communities fail to adapt to economic change and allow housing speculation to disconnect prices from local economic reality. These 10 cities represent canaries in Ontario's housing market coal mine, warning us of broader economic instabilities that could reshape the province's real estate landscape forever. From resource-dependent northern communities to automotive Rust Belt cities to tech bubble casualties, the common thread is housing prices that lost all connection to local economic fundamentals. What do you think about these predictions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments about which city you believe faces the most severe correction.